Welcome to the Quaker Nation podcast presented by DP Sports. We're here with former sports editor of the Daily Pennsylvanian, Walker Carnathan. How are you, Walker?
I'm doing great. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing tremendous. I wanted to get right into something that's been pressing on Penn Athletics for quite a while. We have come to quite the resolution recently, and that's the NIL settlement, or lack thereof in the Ivy League's case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have been the primary source of reasoning and insight onto this entire ordeal from the DP's point of view. Most recently, your column, The Conference That Stood Still, on January 23rd. The Ivy League's decision to opt out of the NCAA payment settlement is the latest in a series of self-limiting policies. So, with that being said, let's get right to it. And I think the best way to start would be for you to explain what the current state of affairs is with the Ivy League and NIL at the moment.
Yeah, of course. So obviously NIL, name, image, and likeness is on its own, and in the Ivy League's case and across college sports, a really big, complex, difficult topic to grapple with. But it's one that has changed the tides of major college athletics in the last couple of years, and in my opinion, will only continue to grow and cause more waves across college sports, and that includes right here in the Ancient Eight. And so far to this point, the Ivy League's standpoint on NIL has been in opposition of what they refer to as pay for play. So it's important, first of all, to distinguish the difference between pay-for-play NIL and so-called true NIL or legitimate NIL. So the difference between those two is, let's say, legitimate NIL is when a player is paid to endorse a specific product. So Cooper Flag being paid to wear New Balance sneakers and appear in New Balance ads. He is legitimately endorsing that product, and New Balance is paying him a sum to use his name, image, and likeness in those advertisements. If a Penn basketball player wanted to be endorsed by, or a Lancaster County Motors wanted to endorse a Penn basketball player, and they thought that having that Penn basketball player in their ads would help them sell cars, then they would pay that Penn basketball player
a sum of money in order to appear in the ads.
Exactly. So that's legitimate NIL or true NIL. And the Ivy League allows that and promotes that and has no problem with that. No. But it also doesn't happen at the rate at which you would expect at big-time universities either.
Got it.
For example, like even the biggest not the biggest college football fan, but the average college football fan in America can't tell you more than 5 or 6 players on the national championship winning Ohio State Buckeyes football team.
But that would make sense.
Those players are all still making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in NIL, and that's because of the second type of NIL, which is the quote-unquote pay-for-play NIL. And when you hear the term NIL collective, that is what those quote-unquote collective is a pay-for-play method. So the way what were you going to say? Sorry.
I think it's important to also note that collectives starting in now year 2025 are being moved over, and this is aside from the Ivy League. The money is now moving back to the schools. Now, this is not in the Ivy League. I want to make that abundantly clear. But collectives will have a new significance on the D1 collegiate level, given the fact that all of the power of the money is moving back to the athletic departments themselves rather than what it was up in the air or with some other bureaucracy in the way. But yes, go ahead.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's all the most important thing to know about NIL is that no one knows where it's going, or no one knows, at least with certainty, the degree to which it's going to change in terms of how it's regulated, or how it actually plays out in the next couple of years. But just to finish the point about pay for play NIL, that's essentially what it sounds like. The player receives compensation for being a part of the team. So when you hear that Ohio State or Oregon or these big time football programs pay $20 million for their rosters, that's coming from pay for play collective money. So the donors pool their money in a collective fund. I can't think of any of the names of them specifically off the top of my head, but it'll say the Buckeye Collective. I don't think that's actually one of their collectives, but that group will then facilitate the transfer or allowance of that money to the athletes on the team. And that's where you see the huge sums of money come from at these big-time programs. And because the Ivy League does not support pay-for-play or NIL collectives, that's why you're seeing a lot of the transfer decisions you're seeing now. 4 stars, Tyler Perkins, Danny Wolf, Chizo Makpara, Malik Mack transfer out of Ivy League basketball last season.
Right.
Right here at home, Malachi Hosley leaves for Georgia Tech. And that's not to say that this wouldn't necessarily, there's always going to be players who transfer, but it's certainly happening. Also, another one for football, Cooper Barkay, the conference's leading receiver, transferred to Duke.
Also Proctor, Dartmouth.
Proctor to Northern Illinois, yeah. So it's just at a larger clip than has happened previously.
So I just wanted to get back. So House of Victory at USC, the Foundation at Ohio State, Alabama fear the wave at Tulane. They all have their own sort of names. Penn doesn't have one. Anyone, we can start thinking of names, but I'm not sure that that's going to help anyone at this time. But I want to turn the effects of this are going to far outweigh the causes and the deliberations and the contemplation that has gone on until this point. And you touched on it with most recently and most prominently Tyler Perkins, who obviously led the Penn basketball team in scoring last season, who's now on the bench at Villanova.
He's getting some good playing time. Hit a big three against St. John's the other day.
His first start was against Penn.
Yeah.
We were at that game. And he has gotten more minutes now that Villanova has started to continue its fall off from national prominence. But be that as it may, Danny Wolf, definitely the most significant, prominent figure from the Ivy League who has left and since been incredibly successful at the University of Michigan. So what can we say about the talent that is in the Ivy League that will no longer stay in the Ivy League, or that will just not come to the H&E to begin with?
Yeah, I think something that's really important to bring up in this whole NIL Ivy League conversation, and something that every athlete I've ever interviewed about it has been quick to bring up, is the scholarship issue.
Right.
Because it's not
or
just
lack thereof.
Lack thereof. Because it's not just that the Ivy League doesn't support pay for play. They also don't have athletic scholarships, and it's sort of just exacerbating the existing financial burden that is placed on Ivy League student athletes that wouldn't be placed on them if they chose to take their talents to a different school. So it's just important to note that a lot of Ivy League athletes, both current and former, say, the NIL thing is one problem, and it certainly is a problem, but perhaps in their minds the more pressing issue, and the one that will be more foundationally effective or affecting to the league's overall competitive balance or ability to compete, at least in major sports moving forward, is its lack of athletic scholarships in addition to a lack of NIL. And in the conference's opinion, it's all sort of under the same umbrella, which is the pay-for-play thing. The Ivy League does not give merit-based scholarships, period. Whether
for
it's
athletics or other reasons.
Exactly, to play
Right.
violin, or because you're a great writer, or because
or
you're
you have a
great at
1600 and a 4.0.
Exactly.
They don't give those either.
Exactly. So just in a lot of the conversations I've had with athletes over the course of reporting on this, they'll say it's not just the NIL, it's the scholarships. And with those two things combined, I think you're going to see a big absence in the recruiting pool. Obviously, it's tough to more objectively quantify that, because you can't say, oh, well, this kid would have come here if we had scholarships or NIL, or this kid, et cetera, et cetera.
That's all conjecture.
Exactly. But you can say, it was the first time. I think the 4 undergraduates that transferred out of the conference for men's basketball last season were the most ever, or the most at least going to other major schools. So I think you're just going to see more and more of that. But I don't necessarily know if the conference is that concerned about that, at least as long as their academic standing isn't affected. And another thing that's important to note, and that I think is also an important part of this conversation, is that other sports at the Ivy League level have not been nearly as impacted as the footballs and the men's basketballs and the women's basketballs of the world, because the Ivy League is still elite in lacrosse and rowing and what are so-called the prep school sports for the most part, in my opinion, because they aren't maybe as affected as in terms of the NIL market. Obviously, there is NIL markets.
Do you think there's
for these
also
sports,
a point to be made there that the pro level and the next steps for those athletes isn't nearly as concerning to them?
I think that's a big part of it, yeah. When I spoke to Jordan Dingle, who was sort of, in his own words, the first domino to fall in terms of all this transfer stuff out of the Ivy League, he said that, he said that he didn't transfer out because of NIL. He transferred out because he was prioritizing the next step in his basketball career, which was obviously for him an attempt to make it to the NBA. And I think that is a big concern. Obviously, if you're a star men's or women's basketball player or a star football player, there is a semi-feasible, achievable next step for you after college. Whereas, the PLL is growing, but that's, if you're an Ivy League lacrosse player, you're probably better off using your Ivy League degree to get a quote-unquote normal job rather than pursuing your professional lacrosse career, which could be, a factor in these transfer outcomes. But I do think it's important to value the non-basketball, football sports when we have these NIL discussions, because it's easy to say, okay, the conference is totally doomed. And I think it's possible to say that if it keeps going in the current trajectory, maybe the major sports will suffer a competitive fall off, but there are other sports that have historically been great and will continue to be great. But it's all just sort of part of the same complex equation.
Now, I think before I say this, you spoke to the point that it's not affecting all sports equally. In fact, it's definitely affecting football and basketball on both the men's and women's sides more than it is almost any other sport. Nevertheless, the Ivy League, only historically was a preeminent football conference 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And there were many national champions from the Ivy League, but that is something of the past, to say the least. In the previous now 15 seasons, we've seen 2 Ivy League teams reach the second weekend of the men's NCAA tournament, with the first being Cornell in 11, and then just a few years ago. So when you hear the men's basketball coaches in their pressers, and we're there, at 1 or 2 every week, we're sitting there listening to these coaches, and I hear a lot of them saying the league is as best as it's ever been. When you hear that, what do you think to yourself?
I think that it's not necessarily untrue, but I think it's important to consider that all of this NIL discussion is sort of still in its infancy. And the impact of direct compensation for players in terms of college athletics. How many years of college athletics were there before, NIL was legalized? I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's certainly more
130, give or take.
It's certainly been a lot more than the 4 or 5 since it has been. It's kind of like, when people say how long the earth has been around versus how long human beings have been around, we conceptualize it as forever, when in reality it's like a second in a 24-hour day. Right. So I think the ramifications of name, image, and likeness and direct pay-for-play compensation on the league, while they have sort of, been felt in the short term, will be more impactful in the long term. And that's not to say that there aren't still great teams and great players in the Ivy League. I'm not going to go and list them off the top of my head because there's a lot, but just to look at the top team in the league, at least on the men's side, is Yale, who lost their best player in the offseason and is still 8-0.
And need not I mention, almost was dethroned by the Penn Quakers this past weekend.
Almost, yes, exactly. Played them close. I mean, not the first time we didn't play them close, but this time we played them.
The one at the
played them
Palestra
very
was
close.
something else.
So I think the big thing that at least I've always heard the Ivy League basketball coaches say, both on the men's and women's side throughout, my 3 or so years reporting on the league, is that, it's very hard to win league games no matter which team you are, because in essence the teams are all pretty close to one another, and they're all operating on the same playing field.
There's a lot of parity in Ivy League basketball is what you're saying?
That's what the coaches say. That's what the coaches say, and I agree to a certain extent. I think the Ivy League is one of the few leagues where truly on any given day, any team can beat the other. I think you saw that with Penn and Yale this past Friday. I think Penn is a team that is better than their record suggests, and Yale is obviously 8-0, but that was a very close game. But you're not going to see the
Northwestern Wildcats walk into Mackey Arena with and keeping it close with Purdue. That's just a lot less likely.
Exactly. So, and obviously all the coaches are recruiting from the same standpoint. It's not like James Jones and Mitch Henderson are allowed to give scholarships and no one else is. We're all sort of dealing with the same intrinsic challenges, but
without a collective.
Exactly. But nonetheless, I think it's worth noting that at least in the interim, like you said earlier, the basketball teams are, continuing to find success on the national stage. Last year, the Ivy League had 2 bids in the NCAA women's tournament, which was a huge step. The Columbia women's basketball team this season has been incredible. The Princeton women's basketball team is great as always. Penn women's basketball had a great weekend, 2-0.
And the Yale men's basketball team has been terrific.
Exactly. So while it's easy, and I certainly, as you mentioned at the top in my column, have, levied my fair share of criticism at the league's decisions in regards to scholarships, NIL, etc.
All with tremendous merit, might I add.
Thank you. But I think it's all important to consider in the context of one another, because it's not like every single Ivy League team's best player transferred away last offseason and now the league is totally destitute and will get blown out by whoever they play in the first round of March Madness, because
which may happen,
but the that's still with its benefits. And I'm in a sports business class right now where we discuss the Ivy League's decision on the House settlement. And there's a lot of athletes in that class, and a big thing that a lot of them mentioned was that they didn't make the decision to come to Penn because they wanted to make money off their sport. It was the old, tried and true Ivy League adage of it's a 40-year commitment, not a 4-year commitment. And I think that is still obviously has merit. It's, probably a big reason why the Ivy League gets any recruits at all and, gets great recruits. But it's very difficult to decipher one way or the other, and it's all still changing every day. So
before we finish, I spoke to you about this before we went on. Penn on their athletics website mentions NIL. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a section devoted to it. I don't understand how it works or how effective it is. I think a lot of people, a lot of the listenership here, if they know it exists, which is, I think, up in the air. But even if they know, I don't think they understand it, because a lot of our preconceived notions, especially with all the reporting that's come out, is that the Ivy League and NIL don't belong in the same sentence, mm-hmm. at least for the time being. So what can you tell us about the current initiatives the University of Pennsylvania and the athletics department has taken with name, image, and likeness so far?
Yeah, so I think as of last February or January or at some point, the Ivy League, Penn specifically has created this, I think portal or platform is the proper word for it, called Penn IL something. Maybe there's like a second word in there, but basically the idea behind it is to facilitate NIL transactions or conversations or deals between Penn
Penn
student
exchange.
athletes. Exchange, yes,
there you go.
exactly. So I did a story about it when it first happened. I interviewed Penn football wide receiver Jared Richardson. He said, it's a great step for the league or for the school to be supporting its athletes in this way. But and it is. I mean, there's absolutely nothing bad you can say about Penn making this additional effort to get its students in conversations with people who could potentially financially support their athletic endeavors. And a lot of other Ivy League schools have similar things. I don't know the names of them off the top of my head or which ones do. Maybe all of them do, but they all have these sort of platforms and exchanges. But again, it all goes back to the initial difference between true NIL and pay-for-play NIL, because all of these transactions that the Penn IL exchange is supporting are true NIL. So it's a student athlete being paid $50 and a gift card to post something on their Instagram story, or they get a free T-shirt or a couple free meals at a local restaurant to support that restaurant on social media. Or when I was a freshman, I guess this is before the creation of the Penn IL exchange, but I remember the Penn men's basketball team was on Locust Walk handing out coupons to the since defunct Delco Steaks and Franklin's Table. So it's just it's still those true quote unquote legitimate NIL deals that the Ivy League has said, we're in full support of those, all for those. But it is still a step. And, when I have emailed the university and asked for comment from them for the previous NIL reporting that I've done, usually that's what they point to. They say, we take these steps, we're in full support of helping create NIL opportunities that, we see as legitimate and align with our mission and don't detract from the true student athlete experience and maintain emphasis on the academic experience in the Ivy League. So, it exists, and I'm sure it is helpful for student athletes, but it's just not as wide-ranging or potentially impactful as pay-for-play.
I wanted to also note, so here I'm on the influencer.com that they have, and this isn't a shock, to people who have gone through, not that many people have worked with athletes before. You have to register, on the website, all the requests have to go through the Penn Athletics Compliance Department, which is not unlike any other university, to my knowledge, outside of the Ivy League. They have to approve it, and then you can start a conversation. Now, I don't mean to joke or belittle, but I think the Delco Steaks things, and I guess I can't because they're defunct now anyway, so I guess I can say it. But I think that the men's basketball team giving out coupons for basically internal cheesesteak place vendor in a food hall says something about the amount that the university, or the Ivy League, I should be saying, has gone to support name, image, and likeness of their players, or the fact that this league still prioritizes academics over athletics, which is 100% the case.
Yeah.
And
that the league fully admits that. That's not, they aren't shy about that at all.
I know I don't. I just wanted to wrap up with, what do you foresee as not what do you think is going to happen, but what do you foresee possible areas of change could be from that break the norm from where we are now? And we'll end with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there are a lot of legal proceedings still forthcoming, whether it's the House settlement, or more specifically a still active complaint against the Ivy League's anti-scholarship policy, because on the basis that it violates antitrust law. And depending on the results of those cases, I think there's a real chance that you could see the league forced to make significant change. But outside of a courtroom or a judge saying, okay, you have to abandon this long-held policy, I don't necessarily think it's impossible that the Ivy League would at some point in the next 2 years or 5 years or 10 years consider at least the collective route. Because I think there are ways, and specifically, as you said, with a lot of the dollars now going back to the within the control of the athletic department, and as sort of the wild west of NIL is reeled in a little bit more, I think there are ways to align that the collective possibility with the league's core mission of maintaining emphasis on athletics, or not athletics, academics, and prioritizing the student part of student athlete. I think there are ways to do that. Now, what specific action is taken in that regard, and when the Ivy League decides that's something we're okay with, is, up to Robin Harris and the presidents and the athletic directors, and certainly not me or any student. But I think specifically, just to wrap it up with this one last point, I think you've seen that the Ivy League does listen in certain cases. The recent decision to join the FCS playoffs in football began as a proposal from the student athletes
committee.
From the student athletes part of the Ivy League committee. So
in which there's representatives from multiple different sports from of both sexes from all 8 schools.
Exactly. And that's obviously a much smaller, less consequential decision than saying we can pay our players, or we're going to now undo this policy we've held since 1945 of anti-pay for play. But I don't think it's impossible. When I look ahead, I don't say the Ivy League's never going to do anything about this and the major sports are going to go into oblivion and that'll be it. I think it is possible for change to occur. It's just a matter of both if and when, and how the league sees potential player compensation as going hand in hand with its core mission of prioritizing academics, because it will never do anything that it sees as jeopardizing that mission.
One last question. Who should have won, and Jalen Hurts can be the correct answer, who should have won the MVP of Super Bowl 59? And why?
I'm going to go with Jalen Hurts. I think if you could give it to the entire Eagles defense, you could do that. But since it has to go to an individual player, and obviously there's standout performances on that defense, whether it's Josh Sweat with 2.5 sacks or Cooper DeJean with a pick 6 and Zach Bond with a pick, Saints legend Zach Bond. Not a safety. But I think if you're going to give it to one player, Jalen Hurts, apart from that pick in the first half, played one of the best games I've ever seen him play. Also, performed phenomenally in their previous Super Bowl. So I think you have to reward him there. He's just on the money the whole time. And the Lombardi's back in Philadelphia.
You happy that he's your franchise quarterback?
Very.
All right, we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you for listening to the Quaker Nation podcast. Walker, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure recapping all the NIL happenings going on around the Ivy League. For now, that will do it. We'll see you next time. I'm Brian Barth, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.